Hey legends, and welcome back to the least knowledgeable sim racing channel, where AMS2 was just a few days too late to be featured in our head-to-head GT3 comparison between R Factor 2 and Assetto Corsa Competizione. That aside, we're going to sneak it in all the same. You've likely heard by now that AMS2 has just dropped its major update, featuring its opening salvo of GT3 and GT4 cars, putting it in direct contention with the kings of sims. To those who can remember all the way back to March of this year, the video which pivoted this channel back towards sim racing was a feature on AMS2 in its original early access state, followed by a direct comparison to R Factor 2. Back then, things were fairly rough in Automobilista land, and we didn't even really have the right corresponding classes of cars to compare it properly to the foremost sims. That's no longer an issue, with AMS2 releasing its 2015 Mercedes-AMG GT3, 2016 Porsche 911 GT3 R, and 2019 Mclaren 720S GT3. These are supplemented by the 2018 Mclaren 570S GT4, 2017 Camaro GT4-R, and 2016 Porsche GT4 Cayman Clubsport. I'm going to do my best to run through as many of these cars as possible in this video, giving you my brief initial impressions of how they handle with their default setups, and more importantly, how they contrast to the two present-day kings of GT simulators, R Factor 2 and Assetto Corsa Competizione. Way back at the beginning of the year, one of my stated hopes for AMS2 was that it would find a niche to slot into between these two sims, with the dynamic, engaging car behaviours of R Factor 2 crossed with the audiovisual fidelity and next-gen feature set of ACC. Being granted their new Nurburgring GP circuit created with the aid of laser scanning, we're well positioned to get a good impression of how this sim handles under very similar circumstances to both RF2 and ACC, given that we very recently did a detailed lap analysis of both on this very same track. However, this is not the only major update to the game. Reza appear to have significantly rewritten the force feedback engine in order to provide yet more detail, less dead zone, and more accurate per-car behaviours, especially when acting at extremes. I can't wait to delve into all of this, so let's just do it. Before we do, however, be sure to hit the sub to catch our future sim racing content, and if you'd like to support the channel, consider using one of the affiliate links down below where all of the gear you'll see me using for this video is listed. Ahoy there! I bet you thought this was just going to be a screen capture video, but you thought wrong. You're going to have to deal with little Ermin hanging around in the corner of your screen. Think of me as your conscience in these shark-infested waters known as the sim racing scene. So, we're starting off, of course, in the Porsche 911 GT3 R here at the Nurburgring GP with the same chicane layout as ACC and R Factor 2. This is super awesome for us because we just did the detailed comparison between ACC and R Factor 2 on this very track, albeit using the Ferrari 488. But I have in my own time been driving this particular car with this particular track very, very often in R Factor 2, so this forms a great basis of comparison for me too. And of course us immediately driving into the sunset. Like any great 80s action flick, I of course set it to this time of day because I care about your immersion into this game, and look at that, that's just gorgeous. That's one thing I'll never take away from the Madness engine is how gorgeous it can look throughout the time cycles. I mean, I can't wait to have endurance races on the full Nürburgring endurance layout on this thing. So, while I'm waffling on, you're probably wondering, how does the damn car actually feel, Ermin? Well, you know what? I'm just going to come right out and say it. It's the best feeling tin top I've driven in AMS2, and probably project cars, any project cars really. I have to admit, it's not the complete default setup. I really wasn't vibing with that thing. It felt really kind of understeery and stilted. I couldn't really get the brake feel quite right. I still sort of can't. Now, I'm not sure if that's just something they haven't dialed in. And that feels around about right. I think it just needs a better default setup. I'm guessing the guys probably rushed to get this out and just didn't quite dial it in properly. But if you know how to set up a car, you can get yourself something relatively decent. So, okay. Where does it sit? We have so many versions of this car, so many versions of this track. Let's just start going through all of it while we finish our outlap and prepare for the quote-unquote speedy one. Alright, so the car itself, I would say it leans more towards R Factor in terms of its overall feel. It's very kind of spongy and dynamic in its handling. It's all about that wrangling it at the limit factor. ACC feels a little more stilted, a little more connected at the rear somehow. A little less bouncy, if you will, a little less reboundy. We've still got that very prominent Madness engine rebound effects going on. Whatever that is, I'm guessing it's probably that Seder tire model. Oh man, and one thing you're noticing here is I'm struggling to get the brake feel right. I just can't quite get the brake feel, the ABS setting. I'm not really sure what the car is doing. I don't know if the wheels are locking up or if the ABS is pulsing or not. I'm not getting the telemetry on my wheel. I'm not really feeling it through the force feedback, which actually segues quite well into the next part of all this. They've rewritten major parts of the force feedback engine, and following in Reese's advice, I've turned off all unnatural damping systems built into the DD1 wheel that I'm using. So the only thing I'm actually using is the force feedback interpolation to soften the signal, make it a little less coarse, make it a little less grainy, just take care of the worst parts of it. And the rest is entirely being handled by the in-game damping setting. Low forces completely at 0. If it still functions the way that it did, that's what you should have it at on a direct drive wheel. I've got the gain just enough to feel what's going on without having the wheel snap out of my hand. But one thing I'm definitely struggling is the feel under braking. It always feels either too understeery or too oversteery. It kind of breaks out. It still has that residual Madness engine kind of a, flick on canned slide effect thing that happens. It's very weird. It's this kind of rubber bandy slide. But it's far diminished to every other tin top that they've had in this game to date. So massive props to that. This part here feels very reboundy. Lots going on underneath the wheels. God, and that time of day just looks gorgeous, doesn't it? As you guys probably noticed, I haven't set up an AI race. AI tends to bring out the worst in me in AMS, as you probably noticed the last time we handled AMS. So I figured it's probably best that I just do some light hot lapping and talk to you guys about how things are going in terms of the handling feel of the game. Alright, almost got it there. So the brake points don't quite feel commensurate with the other games. Been driving this a lot in ACC and R Factor. I just can't quite get the car to be as quick. I think my quickest laps in this have been in the 156s or 157s, whereas in R Factor and ACC I'm in the 153s and 154s. So it just doesn't quite line up to what I know. I think the BOP needs a bit of work on this car, or the overall feel, the default setup, something needs a bit of work. But in terms of the silhouette of it, just the shape of what I know, I mean, if you know how to drive this car on this track in ACC and R Factor and you come to this game, you'll pick it up pretty darn quickly. Just that brake feel that gets a little bit wonky on you. It doesn't quite feel as rear-engined as it does in the other two games. It doesn't quite render that sensation of the weight being in the rear. I don't know whether that's because it's been set up to understeer quite so much. I had to undo a lot of things. There was way too much toe on the front and the rear in this car. Still has those distinctive AMS handling characteristics on the limit, but it does feel a little more sophisticated and real, if you will, than it has thus far. Me, of course, being aware that I'm going into lap 3 here, but I'm enjoying myself, guys. I'm enjoying talking to you about how this game feels, and it's the chicane that always gets me on that brake feel. I just can't quite get it right. As you can see, rear end's coming around there. Car very stable under acceleration, like all rear-engine cars should be. I'm curious what we got here. Will it be a 156? No, low 157. So, yeah, to give you an idea, it's not... It could be a BOP thing, could be a setup thing, but I mean, for a first release of GT3 cars, especially after the last experience I had in this game, where you can tell I might frustrated from the AI punting me constantly, leading up to the video, this is a far cry from what I expected. In terms of the Nurburgring GP track itself, I don't want to cruise around in this car too much longer. I want to step it along, try out the other cars, but I'll tell you guys what I think about the actual model of the track itself in the next drive. Let's do that. So here we are in the Mclaren 720S GT3. Now, this is my first ever time booting this car up. Never driven it around here before at all. This is going to be exactly like our R Factor 2 GT3 BOP test. I'm just going to do an out lap and a normal lap. We're going to talk through it. And you're going to see the best and worst of what I'm capable of here. So let's give this a shot. Looks pretty darn good so far. Certainly a lot better than the R Factor version I'm used to. Sounding half decent too. Let's get rid of that HUD so we don't have to look at that. Beautiful. Alright, still got that nice, gorgeous time of day. I just got done taking some nice thumbnails for this video, which hopefully enticed you to click on it. So I'm really curious what this is going to feel like. Normally the default setups in AMS aren't the best thing on the planet, but we'll see. We'll see. Okay, alright. So far so good. Okay, feels relatively planted, actually. Feels kind of nicer than the Porsche so far, but we've yet to drive this in anger. Very long gears by the looks of it. A lot more stable under braking, at least at slow speeds. Ooh. Ooh. Alright. My favorite car brand. Feels like coming home. You guys don't know that, do you? You think I'm a Ferrari guy? I'm not, actually. I just loved the 488 for some reason. The 720S was always my thing. And the 600 LT, the one supercar I've been in real life. And I'm hoping very shortly the C8R. Right, Marcel? Alright, man. Not much guesswork in this. It's just doing what I want it to do. Force feedback's pretty reasonable. I remember giving this game some grief for not having the micro details of R Factor in the force feedback. Well, they're there. I'm getting the grain down the straights. I'm feeling what's happening with the tire deformation. Very long gears in this car. I'm just trying to get used to it. A lot of grain. Reza also saying that flat spots should be a lot more feelable, if you will, through the force feedback now. So any of you open wheeler guys, lock up the brakes for me. Let me know how that goes. I don't quite have time to explore all of that in this video. Wow, this car is so much more steady than the Porsche. It's almost like it's a better car. Yeah, don't tell anyone. Alright, I feel like I'm short shifting. I can't quite get the rev range of this car. I'm finding the audio cues aren't quite letting me know when to shift. Probably gonna have to program the wheel to start flashing at me when it's time. Oh, wow, okay, alright. Alright, braking is still a little vague in this car. And I promise you guys I'll talk about the actual track quality itself. So, in terms of the versions of the Nurburgring I've driven, I've got to say that this is probably my least favorite. There's something about it that just doesn't quite feel as detailed as what I know from the R Factor version. And maybe due to the handling model of ACC being so refined, you know, 2 and a bit years in, whatever it's been, maybe it just kind of comes through better in that game as well. Don't get me wrong, it's great. Like, I mean, if you've driven the Nurburgring GP in any other game, you can drive it just fine in this. It's probably one of the highest quality tracks in AMS, other than Brands Hatch, Alton Park, you know, the British couple that they actually laser scanned. It's a very high quality track, don't get me wrong. I don't feel like it's quite on the same level as R Factor in terms of the mesh. Now I may be wrong, that might just be the physics engine conveying that sensation to me. But all things being said, I'm more than happy driving this. It certainly feels like I've been here thousands of times before. Kind of curious where this car sits pace-wise, given that it's so much easier to drive. I'm going to guess that it's a lot slower. Usually when cars are easy to drive, they're slower. That's how it tends to work in motorsport. Oh man, you get so much understeer there for some reason. I'm trying to work out why. Seems to be endemic to the physics engine because both cars did it. And it doesn't happen in ACC or R Factor. Alright, let's pull up the HUD, let's see what we're doing. How are we looking? How are we looking? Yep, definitely slower. Alright, you know what? I really want to go in for another lap because I'm really enjoying this car and I'm taking to it way easier than the Porsche. So I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do another lap while talking at you guys. Why not, right? So I think this car can probably get into the 155s without too much hassle. Yeah, you can drive it a bit more aggressively. Need to just kind of feel out the track limits here, see what I can get away with. Yes, this is the experience I want. This is currently the best tin top I've driven in AMS. My favorite car at one point in R Factor 2 before the arrival of the mighty 488 and before the arrival of the C8 alrighty. Yeah, feels good. Feels real nice. Yeah, it turns in better, everything. It's honestly, considering that this is a default setup, that I haven't touched it up at all, this is literally, I think, my third lap in the car, period. It's pretty amazing, all things considered. Would have expected myself to have spun by now. Don't go track limits. Oh, very nice. You get a bit of rotation on power, so you can kind of bring it around. I reckon I'm going a second quicker. I wonder if I can push it through the chicane without actually understeering, and that way make up the difference. Come on, come on. I think that's where I'm losing all the time. I'm just not getting the car to rotate in there. Come on, baby. Come on. Come on. Still feeling out where I can and can't push in this game. But let's see how we go. If I ever learn when to shift in this car. 155.5, yeah, so that completely obliterated the Porsche. Porsche needs a bit of a better setup, I think. This car, amazing. So far, my favorite tin type in all AMS. Wow. Okay, and here we are in the very last GT3, the AMG GT3. I forget which year exactly. This is a car that R Factor 2 never quite rendered phenomenally, mostly because the force feedback was a little bit off for some of us, or for many of us as it were. It's one that's rendered very, very well in ACC. I'm going to try and do this without the HUD for the majority. Let's see how we go. I got kind of tired of that sunset time of day, so we're doing something a little bit more closer to midday. Let's see how we go. So far, the force feedback certainly feels a lot heavier. I don't think they've evened out the FFB between cars yet. This is substantially heavier than the Porsche. Gears a little shorter than the Mclaren by the looks of things. Yep, definitely. Force feedback definitely heavier. Not necessarily in a bad way, it's quite engaging, but certainly heavier. Definitely has to be dropped back if you're going to be doing any endurance racing. Oh dear God. Okay, I'm struggling a little bit to actually turn the wheel now, but that's alright. We'll deal. We're strong, manly men. So on the whole, I'm not really as taken with it as I was with the Mclaren, but it's certainly better to me than the Porsche. It's funny how I started with my least favorite car. Yep, certainly turns in better than the Porsche. Possibly turns in better than the McLaren as well. So both of these having better default setups than the Porsche. Getting a bit of that pendulum feeling, you get that sensation that the engine is way out in front of you, so they've rendered that reasonably well. Still trying to work out where the gearing is. These cars are notably different to one another in that respect. They kind of pull their time out of different portions of the track. I'm sure the alien lap involves basically just doing that in fifth and just flying over with no brakes. Glad they omitted the death traps on the apexes of the chicane there. Unlike ACC, whew, that version of the track is quite something. Alright, let's see how hard we can brake in this thing. Come on, no, don't overshoot. With some of that nice braking squeal going on. I feel like every single sim out there right now has a better sound engine than R Factor, and that, you know, as a lifelong audio engineer, makes me very, very sad that my favorite simulator has the worst sounds. Pretty much quantifiably the worst sounds. This is very, very, very serviceable, this car, in terms of look, sound, and feel. My props to Reza. I feel like I should come down on you guys a little bit harder. I feel like every single time I do one of these videos, I come back and the next version of the game is substantially better than the last, so, you know, pretend I said something angry and mean. Can't wait to try the Nordschleife. It's going to be something else. That being said, if anybody from Riese or anybody that knows the Riese devs is watching this, please, one of the things that makes this possible for those of us who do this, well, not so much for a living, but those of us who do this, I guess, as a hobby like myself, and give the game and the company free promotion, getting the content ahead of time allows us to prepare more thought out videos without having to rush and reschedule our day plans on the day to be like, oh my god, a new GT3 update is out, I better drop everything and just like scramble out a video. So please, if you guys have a program in store, your influencers are counting on you for some leeway on the next one. Alright, let's get the stats up. I highly doubt I've done particularly well in this, but we'll see. Yeah, not the quickest lap of my life, but very solid car. I think a solid second place for me personally to the McLaren. Not much more to say. It looks like it had a very big fuel load. I'm sure if I dropped some of that back, we could have gained some seconds on that lap. But anyway, let me know what you guys think. That concludes the GT3s. We're going to go through and jump through the GT4s very quickly on the same track and do much the same thing. Alright, we're in our first GT4 car, the McLaren 570S, one that I'm very familiar with from ACC, and a cockpit that looks highly reminiscent of it as well. Feel right at home already. We'll get rid of the artificial game HUD and have at it. Now our first GT4 car, I have to be wary of the different brake markers around here. I'm quite calibrated towards the GT3s right now. I'm very curious how this is going to feel. Just got to remind myself, it's basically a road car. It's a road car, it's not really a, you know, hyper race car thing. One thing I'm noticing already is that the rev LEDs aren't really matching up to what's going on in the car. So they hit blue well before the actual rev limiter is hit. There's a disparity between what I'm seeing on the Formula V2 rim and what's actually happening on the HUD in front of me. That aside, the car feels very playful. It gives you a lot more slack and leeway than the ACC variant does. The ACC variant being very, very rigid in the way that it wants you to drive it. When you accelerate, it's basically full understeer. When you're off throttle, it wants to murder you. But then there's like mid-corner understeer and all kinds of crazy stuff going on. This one's a lot more straightforward. A lot more easygoing, if you will. With that very typical Madness Engine AMS2 kind of limit behavior that you can correct for if you just snap in time. But remember to brake way earlier. Way earlier. One thing I've got to say is they always get that sense of speed, that sense of excitement going in this title. Even if my tyres aren't quite warm enough to take corners as I should be taking them. Got to get used to these different brake markers here. So one thing I've got to say is from the few external replays I've recorded thus far, the game still needs quite a bit of work in terms of its external sounds. There's a lot of weird clipping going on, a lot of weird stereo localization, fake stereo stuff. It's just, it doesn't quite sound right. Inside the car, different story, sounds quite serviceable. I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking or anything like that, but it's certainly a generation or two ahead of R Factor, that's for sure. Probably not knocking on ACC's door, but, you know, what is really other than Dirt Rally? Alright, let's try for an actual quote-unquote speedy lap. Or at least the closest I'm able to in a car of this class. Come on, nice and easy. Worst thing you can do there is unsettle the car and just end up spinning at the bottom of the hairpin. It's quite a bit of a drop there, which you notice when you're there and on the track. A lot more vertical than you might realize. It's just, it really talks to you on the limit. It really helps you understand what's going on underneath the tires. It's one thing I've always really enjoyed about this game. But never really criticize it for a lack of communication with the driver. It's definitely borrowing far more heavily from R Factor 2's school of development than it is ACC's. It's all about the dynamism, it's all about the playfulness, and that doesn't surprise me at all. Getting a feel for what R's are about. I mean, that BMW Pro car they pulled out last time, oh my god, what even is that? How do I not own one? Alright, car's maybe not rotating enough at the fronts. I think maybe we got to lower the bump stop at the rear, let the car kind of sway around. Let me turn into that one while coasting. But I mean, again, this is a default setup. Car's probably full of fuel. Probably a lot to be worked on there. As far as the default setup goes, I mean, I can't complain. It's probably far more easy to drive than the ACC variant is. I remember struggling with that one until I finally clicked with it. But that game is a stickler for only accelerating past the apex. In this game, you can really kind of muffle it. Kind of just miff your way through. Again, the brake feeling a little vague to me. They can somehow communicate what the brake is doing a bit better or make it less sensitive or something. It's just not quite, what do we get? 205. I have no idea whether that's fast or slow in a GT4. I'm going to guess that it's highly mediocre, and we'll move on to our very next vehicle. Now we're in the Camaro GT4, possibly my very favorite GT4 car in ACC, mostly because of the fact that it doesn't acknowledge the existence of curbs. It may as well not be a thing. Looks like the GT4s don't get tire warmers by the looks of it. I'm just gonna take out this HUD. With that very, very similar character, tonal character, I'm gonna pull the FOV back a bit. Okay, I was hoping we'd see a little bit more than that, but that's alright. Wow, almost feel like I'm in ACC actually, the way this cockpit's been rendered. I'm gonna have to use my Formula V2 rim gear indicator a bit because I can't really see what's going on. Oh, I've got all kinds of sounds happening in there. Okay, rev limiter sounds a bit weird. Car feels maybe a little more floppy than the ACC version. Still highly disrespectful to curbs. I feel like the developers played a bit of ACC here to dial this in. This is all highly reminiscent to me. I've driven a lot of this car in ACC. It's very, very fun. And you get a similar sort of vibe in this. I was deathly afraid it would handle like the road-faring Camaro in this game, which is, my god, that's a handful. But no, this is far, far easier. Still very kind of reboundy. You feel like you're surrounded in some kind of a, I don't know, like you're in a tank or something. Very, very playful at its limit. Very nonchalant about how you drive it around. Rev limiter a bit weird. Not sure I'm vibing that sound. I'm also struggling to kind of hear when I should shift. So the sounds could maybe use a little bit of work, but in the grand scheme of things, man, probably more than I expected, I've got to say. You can tell that Reza were gearing up for this to be the premier content in the game. It's very, very obvious. They've held this back. They've probably been working on it for a while, trying to dial it in. I mean, every single one of these cars I've driven here tonight drives better than any other tin top I've ever driven in AMS2. Without a doubt, it's not even close. Other than maybe the BMW Pro car, but that thing is just like magic. I'm kind of running out of things to say. I mean, it's really just The difference between this car and the McLaren GT4 is the same as the difference between this car and the McLaren GT4 and ACC. It's sort of like if you've driven those, you kind of know what to expect. It's just those cars were transplanted into the Madness engine ecosystem. It's more floppy, it's more bouncy, it's more communicative, there's more detail through the wheel, it's a little wacky, it's not quite as connected on the rear end, especially under braking. It was a little vague under braking still. Traction loss is a little... I mean, it's hard to place it, you know? It's still operating in that place between ACC and R Factor 2, but with some of that Simcade-esque flair thrown in from the Madness engine. I'm sure that's courtesy. It's like just baked in there, waiting for Reza to work around it, assuming it's possible, that is. But above all, one thing they always get is fun. It's always fun. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of lobbies going on online with people driving these, or at least the GT3s. GT4s don't seem quite as popular, but I mean, I'm not complaining. These will be great cars to train some of my less seasoned sim racer friends in. And we finally have something that makes sense to drive. This car especially, because you can just disrespect the curbs. Again, I just wish they would put a little bit more rigid car behavior in this. I shouldn't be able to accelerate before the apex and get away with it this easily. I think that's one thing ACC is a bit more correct. It's a bit more unforgiving. But what did I... Oh, I don't think I even recorded the lap. That's okay. I'll just assume it was quicker than the McLaren, and we'll move on to our very last car, the Porsche Cayman GT4. And lucky last, the Cayman GT4. Let's try this thing out. And just as well, it's getting very late in the evening here in Australia, and I'm getting quite foggy-eyed. I'm very keen to wrap up this video and get to the editing process for you guys. I think I'm going to need a coffee to get through that. Hopefully get it up on time for you Americans, around about maybe noon. Let me know if I nail it, I don't know. I'm just guesstimating. I never know quite how long it's going to take to produce one of these. But here we are, final stretch. Nice cold tyres, again no tyre warmers on the GT4s. Because I really enjoy these interiors. As always, I enjoy the helmet view in this game. I know that you aliens are probably like, what are you doing? It's throwing off your times, but I don't know, it's in some weird way, it's more immersive. It's just bouncing around, guys looking into the apex for me, it's really handy. Ooh, actually kind of felt what was going on under braking there. Very reboundy, the force feedback in this game, in this car, I wanted to say. As before, I'm kind of struggling to find the point at which I should shift if I'm just listening to the sound of the engine. Ooh, really wants to rear over on me. Remember, it's not a front-wheel drive. It feels more rear engine than the 911 GT3 R, which is strange because this is technically a mid-engine car. See, I do learn things. I remember you guys telling me that after that ACC GT4 shootout. I remember saying, it's like, why does this car not feel rear-engined? It's lacking the Porsche-ness of it all. And you're like, well, it's because it's mid-engine, you doofus. And so it is. Yet, still it feels more rear-engine than the actual rear-engine car in this game. Not sure what that's about. It's far more forgiving under braking than the other two have been so far. I have this sneaking suspicion that on its default setup, assuming that I drive it with some reasonable degree of competence, which I'm not capable of, it may be quicker out of the box than the other two. It's just my assumption based on the lines it's allowing me to do on my very first ever lap. Like I said, I've never driven this before. You're literally watching lap number 1 of my life. And now, very promptly coming up to lap number 2 of my life. That chicane feels so wacky in this physics engine. I don't know if it's realistic or not, but it's certainly entertaining. ACC is definitely far less forgiving to drive than this title. Alright, 150. Whoa, this thing has way better brakes than the other two. What's that all about? Mind you, I've not checked the setup at all. I have no idea what the figures are like. Maybe they've cranked up the ABS on this or lowered it. Who knows? I can't quantify what I'm experiencing, I'm just telling you what it is. Very bouncy. Probably a little too bouncy. I feel like a race car would quite be tuned like this. Still, it's fun in its way. You know, one thing I've got to say, and I really wanted to save this for the recap, so I'll probably say again in about a minute or two, but I can't believe that this is free content for anybody that owns the game. So obviously the Nurburgring GP isn't. They're going to rescind that come the Nordschleife, which is like one of the cruelest things you could possibly ever do to me. So Reza, if you're watching, I want the Nordschleife. But these cars, the fact that they come with the vanilla version of the game, I mean, you're already up on R Factor in that regard. While that title might be amazing in terms of its physics and its feel, it just, the vanilla, oh my god, it's too bouncy. The suspension needs to go up, or the dampers or something. But the fact that this actually starts with a reasonable array of stock vanilla content is just, it's another feather in its cap, so to speak. Very fun, these GT4s. I've got to say they've nailed that class balance of performance thing, much like ACC did. They may not be as exhilarating as the GT3s are, but they're certainly very playful. Given how strong this car is under braking, I'm really going to guess that it's going to do better than the other two in terms of its time. Even though the lap does leave a bit to be desired. Oh, so bouncy. Or maybe not. Maybe not, given that I am... Oh my god. That is... Really? I was that slow? Really? That slow? I can't let that stand. Can't be right. I'm wondering whether this car just lacks power compared to the other two, and the braking is where it makes up for everything. Alright, one last lap. I mean, did I go off the track in the last lap and not realize? Jeez, what's that all about? Only 300 MS up. Alright, brake late. Accelerate early and brake late. Jeez, what am I missing? How can it be that much slower? Its brake points are closer to where the GT3s are, so that's something. I don't know what that is, but it's certainly something. Not sure what that really means. Come on. Oh my god, the bouncing. That's not cool. You guys got to tweak the default setup. It's just not cool. This is it. Make or break. This is the last lap, no matter what. See, close to 2 seconds up. That's not even close enough. I should be closer to the 205s. What's happening? What's happening? Alright, can we do this? Just run through there. Oh my god. Too much bouncing. Way too much bouncing. Woof. Exciting though. See myself racing some friends and having some really good quiet private lobbies here. Come on, in the 205. Ah, man, come on. Ah, come on. That's alright. Let's chalk that up as my own fault, or rather just a very strange default setup. So, what's to say? I mean, this is hail to the new premium content in AMS2. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. These are the best tin tops in the game presently. You can tell that Reza have been working on these behind the scenes. You can tell that the licenses mean a lot to them. The Nurburgring as well as all of the cars, and I can't wait to see them add to this, add the Nordschleife, and, you know, before long, they're stressing the fact that this is very much a developmental title. I think much like ACC, which started in a very rough spot but became stronger and stronger and stronger after two years. It became essentially the foremost GT sim on the consumer market. I can see Reza doing the same thing. I just hope that they focus on the correct things. I hope they iron out the AI issues. I hope they sort out the residual handling characteristics, the weirdness on the limit, that kind of reboundy, bouncy thing. As much as I personally like it, it's not necessarily the most realistic handling elements of cars. That being said, little things like the graphical glitches, which you'll probably see on the external replays of this, shadows flickering, little things like that. It makes it difficult to get screenshots sometimes, bugs with the sounds and all kinds of little things here and there. I'd really like to see the game transition from what feels like still an open beta towards being a solid, well-rounded sim title. But if this is any indication of where it's going, man, I absolutely can't wait. If you guys enjoyed this, if you want to see more sim racing content, if you want to see me review my... Whoa! Yeah, apparently that's hooked up. If you want to see me review my H-pattern shifter, this new handbrake from Fanatec, as well as a bunch of things such as, do you actually need these things to drive fast? Little things like that. Make sure to hit the sub, join us for the future videos, and if you want to support the channel, check out the affiliate links down below. Every bit of gear that I use is listed down there, as well as a corresponding link, so if you like any of it, maybe pick it up for yourself, see how you go. So until next time, I'll see you guys later.